To the congregation, Sister Grace was a beacon of light. Every Sunday, her voice filled the church with melodies so beautiful they seemed to carry the congregation straight to heaven. She was the kind of woman people admired, poised, devout, and deeply respected. Her hymns left grown men in tears, and her passion for God was evident in every note she sang. To the outside world, Grace epitomized Christian virtue. But behind the hymns and the serene smiles lay a secret so dark it would shake anyone who dared to look closer. At home, Grace was a different woman. The warmth she exuded in church was replaced with a cold, domineering presence. Her husband David, a soft-spoken and kind man, bore the brunt of her anger. That evening, after another triumphant performance at church, Grace came home in a mood that David had learned to dread. As he carefully set the table for dinner, she walked in, dropping her bag on the couch with a loud thud. "David, why isn't dinner ready yet?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. David, who had been in the kitchen moments before, emerged holding a steaming pot. "I was just about to serve it," he replied gently, avoiding her gaze. "I didn't want it to get cold before you got home." Grace rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Excuses," she spat. "That's all you ever have, excuses. I'm out there giving my all and you can't even manage one simple thing." Her words stung, but David said nothing. He had learned long ago that defending himself only made things worse. As he turned to place the food on the table, she grabbed his arm roughly. "Don't you dare walk away when I'm talking to you," she barked. David flinched but met her eyes, his own filled with a mixture of fear and weariness. This was their routine, her anger erupting like a storm, and him weathering it in silence. On rare occasion, he pushed back. The consequences were worse. Yet, despite the abuse, David never spoke out. He told himself it was his duty to endure, to keep their marriage intact. After all, who would believe him? To everyone else, Grace was the perfect Christian woman who feared the ridicule, the disbelief, the shame of being a man. He was being abused by his own wife, and so he stayed silent, a prisoner in his own home. The abuse was not triggered by any single event. It could be anything: a meal not cooked to her liking, a misstep in conversation, or simply her own frustrations from the day. Grace's rage seemed to simmer just beneath the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. But the next morning, like clockwork, she would don her church attire and transform back into Sister Grace, the angelic choir mistress. David's teaching job at the local elementary school brought him joy, but life, as it often does, took an unexpected turn. The school where David worked underwent budget cuts, and his teaching position was one of the casualties. Losing his job was a devastating blow, not just to their finances but to his sense of identity. For weeks, David searched for new opportunities, sending out resumes and attending interviews, but nothing materialized. The strain of unemployment began to weigh heavily on him. At first, Grace was understanding and supportive. She encouraged him to keep looking and reassured him that things would improve. But as the weeks turned into months, her patience began to wane. Grace had taken on extra responsibilities at work, singing at more events and taking a part-time administrative role at the church to keep them afloat. Her income became their sole means of survival, and the dynamic of their marriage shifted. "You are home all day," Grace said one evening, her tone sharper than usual. "The least you could do is keep the house in order. I'm the one bringing in the money now." "David, it is only fair you do this." David, already struggling with the feelings of inadequacy, nodded silently. He wanted to contribute, even if it wasn't in the way he had envisioned when they first got married. He began taking on more household responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, doing the laundry, and making sure Grace came home to a warm meal and a tidy house. At first, it felt like a small price to pay to ease the tension between them, but over time, Grace's attitude towards him began to change. David first saw Grace on a sunny morning in early spring, the kind of day where the world seemed alive with possibility. He had been new to the church, having just moved into town for a job as an elementary school teacher. That Sunday, as he settled into a pew near the back, the choir began their hymn, and there she was, Grace. Her voice stood out, rich and pure, weaving through the harmonies with effortless beauty. She sang with her eyes closed, completely immersed in the music. David couldn't take his eyes off her. She was beautiful, poised, and carried herself with a confidence that felt magnetic. After the service, David lingered for a while, chatting with some of the members. It didn't take long for Grace to approach him. She was warm and welcoming, introducing herself with a firm handshake and a smile that lit up her whole face. "You must be new here," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "I'm Grace, choir mistress and self-proclaimed welcome committee." David chuckled nervously, guilty as charged. "I am David." From that day on, their paths seemed to cross effortlessly. Grace invited him to join a Bible study group, which gave them an excuse to spend time together. Over the months, their conversations grew stronger, moving from faith and scripture to dreams and life stories. David found her passion for music inspiring, and she admired his quiet kindness and steady nature. By the time David realized he was falling in love, it was already too late to stop himself. And when Grace said yes to his proposal under the oak tree behind the church, he felt like the luckiest man alive. The first year of their marriage was blissful. They prayed together, laughed together, and supported each other in their individual pursuits. Grace continued to lead the choir, while David poured himself into his work as a teacher. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, cracks began to appear. One night, Grace had come home late from work, her face set in a scowl as she tossed her back onto the couch. David was in the kitchen, finishing up the dishes after a dinner she hadn't bothered to eat. Grace glanced at the sink, noticing a single unwashed pan, and it was enough to set her off. "Is it so hard to finish one job completely, David?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet. "I mean, what do you even do here all day?" David stiffened, gripping the edge of the counter. He took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. "I've been cooking, cleaning and taking care of everything else around here, Grace. What more do you want from me?" His voice was even, but the frustration seeped through. "What I want," she shot back, stepping closer, "is a husband who doesn't need to be told how to handle basic responsibilities. I'm working myself to the bone out there, and you can't even manage to get the house in order." Something inside David snapped. He turned to face her, his jaw tight. "Maybe if you weren't so busy being a dictator about everything, you would realize I'm the one doing the best I can. Or is it that not good enough for the great Grace, the choir mistress everyone worships at church?" Grace blinked momentarily, stunned by his words. David had always been the quiet one, the peacemaker. To hear him lash out like this was unexpected, but her shock quickly turned to anger. "How dare you speak to me like that?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I dare," David said, his voice louder now, "because I'm tired of being treated like your personal servant. Just because you make the money doesn't mean you get to treat me like I'm beneath you." David stared at her for a moment longer, his chest heaving, then grabbed his jacket and stormed out of the house. That evening, after their argument, David stepped out of the house to clear his head. The fight with Grace replayed in his mind like a broken record. He had tried so hard to keep peace in their home, to meet her expectations, but no matter what he did, it always seemed to fall short. The cool night was refreshing, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. He wandered aimlessly through the quiet street, letting the stillness calm his racing thoughts. After about an hour, feeling a little more composed, he decided to return home, determined to apologize and try to ease the strain between them. When David walked back into the house, he was greeted by a sight that stopped him in his tracks. Grace was slouched on the couch, a half-empty bottle of wine in her hand, and another open on the coffee table. She looked up at him with glassy eyes, her lips curving into a crooked smile. "Look who is back," she slurred, her words thick with alcohol. "Mr. Perfect Husband, I hope you enjoyed your little walk, Grace." David's voice was soft and concerned. He had rarely seen her drink this much, and never alone. He stepped closer, his gaze flicking between her and the bottles. "How many have you had? How much have you had, Grace?" "Not enough," she muttered, taking another swig from the bottle. "Not enough to forget how useless everything feels." David reached out gently, trying to take the bottle from her hand. "Grace, that's enough. Let me get you some water." "Don't you dare," she snapped, pulling the bottle back and clutching it protectively. "You don't get to tell me what to do, David. You don't do anything anymore." Her words stung, but David swallowed his pride. Please, Grace, let me help you. This isn't you. Grace stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then suddenly, she laughed a hollow, bitter sound. Help me, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You can't even help yourself. David's hand reached out again, this time with more urgency. Grace, please, you need to stop. His voice trembled as he stepped closer. But Grace's eyes were wild, full of anger and confusion. She wasn't listening, wasn't seeing him, and in that moment, something inside her snapped. In a blow of motion, she shoved him with all her strength. David's legs gave way beneath him and he tumbled backward, his head slamming into the edge of the glass coffee table with a sickening crack. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the room as David's body crumpled to the floor, blood pooling quickly beneath him. Grace's hand jerked back, but it was too late. David hit the glass table too hard. The crack was loud and he didn't move. For a long moment, Grace stood there, staring at him, her heart hammered in her chest. She blinked, hoping it wasn't real, but it was. Blood pooled around David's head and his eyes were wide, unblinking. He wasn't breathing. Panic surged through Grace. She dropped the bottle, her legs weak, but her mind was racing. She knelt beside him, shaking him, calling his name, but he didn't respond. David, no, please, she cried, her voice frantic. She grabbed his shoulders desperate, but the reality set in. The room spun as the weight of what she had just done crashed down on her. She didn't know what to do, didn't know what to call. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the phone, but it felt like the world was closing in around her. Tears blurred her vision. She could still hear his last words to her, but now they felt like a distant memory. I'm sorry, David. I didn't mean it for you to happen like this. Please come back. But there was no answer. The hours dragged on in a blur. Grace didn't move. She didn't call anyone. She just sat next to David, her face soaked with tears, her hands trembling. She couldn't look away from the lifeless body beside her. The silence of the house felt suffocating. Every tick of the clock like a reminder of the horrible things she had done. She couldn't make sense of what had happened. Her mind was a chaotic mess, her thoughts scattered and frantic. By the time the first light of morning broke through the windows, Grace was still sitting there, staring blankly at David's body. She knew what she had to do. Slowly and mechanically, she got to her feet. Her hands were still shaking, but she forced herself to act. She cleaned up the blood with paper towels, scrubbing the floor until it was spotless. When the blood was gone, she turned to David with trembling hands. She moved him into the bathroom, hiding him behind the shower curtain as best as she could. Her heart was still racing, but she pushed them down. She had to go on and she had to act normal. Grace dressed quickly as if nothing had happened. She fixed her hair, applied a bit of makeup and stepped into her Sunday best wear. She couldn't let anyone see the cracks in her facade. Not today. When she stepped into the church, the familiar sound of the congregation's murmur filled the air. She felt a strange calmness wash over her as she walked towards the choir. There she picked up her hymnal, and without a single tremor in her hands, she began to sing. Her voice, smooth and melodic, filled the church, just as it had always been. It was the same as ever every other Sunday. To the congregation, Grace was still the perfect Christian woman, devout, beautiful and poised. No one could see the darkness lurking beneath the surface, and no one knew the truth. Grace sang. She sang with so much passion and fervor, like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just killed her husband the night before. As the church service ended, Grace was greeted by familiar faces. People shook her hand, complimented her singing and exchanged pleasantries, but there was a question she wasn't prepared for. Where is David? One of the older women asked, her voice warm but curious. We haven't seen him in a while. Is everything okay? Grace felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. He's fine, she replied quickly, her voice calm and smooth. He had to go on a business trip. He won't be back for a while. A couple of other people overheard and nodded. Oh, that's too bad, one man said. Tell him we are thinking of him. Grace's smile lightened. I will. Thank you, she said, and quickly excused herself, eager to get away before anyone could ask more questions. As she drove home, the lies spun in her head. A business trip, He's not even coming back. It all felt wrong. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever, but for now it was all she had. She couldn't let anyone find out what she had done, at least not yet. When she finally walked through the front door of her house, the emptiness swallowed her. The house felt colder, quieter, and for the first time it felt like a prison. She stumbled to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of wine from the cabinet, and poured herself a glass. Her hands were shaking again, but it didn't matter. She drank it in one cup, then another and another. The alcohol burned down her throat, but it didn't stop the memories from crashing into her. David's lifeless body, the blood, her shaking hands as she hid him away. David was gone, and it was all her fault. Grace passed out, the alcohol lulling her into a stupor, but her mind never truly shut off. She slept fitfully, restless as the guilt gnawed at her even in her sleep. A few days passed and the tension in the house grew unbearable. The silence was deafening, and the weight of David's body hidden in the bathroom loomed over Grace like a dark cloud. But there was something else now. A faint sour odor began to creep through the house, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't long before the neighbors started to notice. One afternoon, as Grace was sitting by the window, she overheard voices from the apartment next door. Her neighbor, Mrs. Miller, was talking to another resident, her voice just loud enough to carry through the walls. "Do you smell that?" Mrs. Miller asked, her voice tight with concern. "It's coming from Grace's apartment. I don't know what it is, but it's unbearable. I think something is rotting in there." Grace's stomach twisted, a cold sweat breaking out on her skin. She pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath, praying that Mrs. Miller wouldn't notice her. "Could it be the trash?" the other neighbor asked. No, Mrs. Miller replied, her voice tinged with worry. "This smells worse than that. It's definitely coming from her flat. We need to tell someone." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Her mind raced with panic. She couldn't let anyone find out. She couldn't let them discover what she had done. Not now and not ever. The doorbell rang a few moments later, pulling her from her thoughts. She opened it, forcing a smile on her face. "Hello, Mrs. Miller," Grace said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, Grace dear, I'm sorry to bother you," Mrs. Miller began, her expression polite but concerned. "But well, we've noticed a smell coming from your apartment. I don't know if you've noticed, but..." Grace cut her off quickly, her voice steady. "I haven't noticed anything. I'm sure it's nothing. Thank you for letting me know, but I'm sure it's not coming from here." Mrs. Miller didn't look convinced, but she nodded and gave a strange smile. "All right, dear, just wanted to check in." As soon as the door closed, Grace leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasp. This room seemed to spin, the weight of her lies pressing down on her chest. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone figured it out. She couldn't keep running from the truth. At exactly 12 a.m. midnight, after hours of pacing and racked with guilt, Grace finally made a decision. She could feel the pressure closing in, the walls closing tighter around her with each passing moment. The smell was growing worse, the neighbors were talking, and the fear was consuming her. She had to get rid of the evidence. She had to make sure no one ever found out what happened. Grace went to the bathroom, her hands trembling as she pulled back the shower curtain. David's body was cold, his lifeless form lying in the same position she had left him. The blood had begun to dry, but the reality of the situation was still just as raw. She dragged the body out of the bathroom, trying not to look at his face. She wrapped him in a large old blanket, tying it tightly. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she lifted him, struggling with the weight, but she managed to drag him to the trunk of her car. The smell was unbearable, but she ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. She opened the trunk of her car, her breath shallow, and placed him inside. Then she slammed the trunk shut, feeling the weight of what she was about to do sink in. Grace got into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She stared ahead, her eyes wide with panic, but she couldn't stop now. She couldn't back out. It was midnight. The streets were empty, the city quiet as she drove. The hum of the engine filling the silence. Her thoughts raced as the headlight illuminated the road ahead, the world outside the blur. She knew where she was going, the bridge downtown, the one where people went to forget, the one where nothing was ever noticed. As Grace neared the bridge, Her heart was racing. The weight of the body in the trunk felt like it was pressing down on her chest, but she tried to push it out of her mind. She was so close. Just a few more minutes and it would all be over. But then, as she rounded the corner towards the bridge, the flashing lights of a police car caught her attention. Her pulse spiked instantly. The officers had set up a routine checkpoint, their cars blocking the road. Grace's breath hitched in her throat as she slowed down, the headlights of her car glaring against the night. The officers waved her over. She pulled to a stop, her mind spinning. This can't be happening, she thought. Two officers approached her car, their expressions unreadable. Grace's hand trembled on the steering wheel as she rolled down the window. "Evening, madam," one officer said, his voice calm but firm. "Routine check. Can we take a look at what is inside your vehicle?" Grace's heart skipped a beat. She forced herself to smile, hoping her voice didn't crack, of course. She said, trying to sound casual, but her tone came out too high-pitched. The officer looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Please step out of the vehicle, madam." Grace's mind raced as she pushed open the door, trying to think of something, anything to get herself out of this. Her palms were sweaty. She reached into her bag, pulling out a few naira notes, her hands shaking. "Look," she said, voice trembling, "I'm in a rush. I really need to get going. How about a little something for your time?" The officers didn't respond immediately. She could see the suspicion in their eyes as one of them glanced at the other. "Madam, step back," the officer said, his tone now stern. "We'll need to search your vehicle." Grace's throat went dry. She couldn't breathe. No, she thought. It was too late. The officers opened the trunk of the car and Grace felt her heart stop. The moment the trunk opened, the stench of death hit the air, filling the night. The officer's eyes widened as he peered inside. And in that instant, the weight of her actions came crashing down. What is this?" the officer muttered as he pulled back the blanket, revealing David's lifeless body. Grace stumbled back, her hands going to her face in shock. I'm sorry, officer." "Madam," the officer interrupted, her voice cold. "We are going to need you to come with us." The panic surged through her, but there was nowhere to run. The officers grabbed her arms firmly, not allowing her to pull away. "Please, you don't understand." Grace started to plead, but the words caught in her throat. They didn't listen. They shoved her into the back of the patrol car, the cold metal biting into her skin. The holding cell felt cold, suffocating, as Grace sat with her head in her hands, her body shaking uncontrollably. The officers brought her in for questioning the next morning. Grace sat across from the detective, her eyes red from lack of sleep and constant tears. Her hands were clasped tightly together and her heart was still racing, but she knew she couldn't keep lying. "I did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The detective leaned in, urging her to continue. "I killed him," Grace repeated. "It started with an argument and I just lost control. I didn't mean for it to happen. David didn't deserve to die. I pushed him and he fell. Then I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought I could fix it, but I only made it worse." Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at the detective, her eyes full of regret. "I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want him to die. It's all my fault. It's all my fault." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with the weight of what she had done. The detective didn't say anything at first. He simply let her cry. When the tears started to subside, Grace looked up at him, her face pale and drawn. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I didn't know how to fix it. Please." The detective nodded, but his face was stoic. "There is nothing that can be done now. You've confessed. We'll have to move forward." Grace's trial came quickly after that. The evidence was clear and there was no denying her guilt. Her confession weighed heavily against her, and the judge sentenced her to serve time in prison. She was going to pay for what she had done, for taking David's life. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, handcuffed and subdued, she could still hear her own voice echoing in her mind. "It was all my fault." The funeral for David was held a few days later. His family, devastated by the loss of their beloved son and brother, stood at his grave, their eyes red from tears. His mother, shaken and heartbroken, clutched a photo of David. His siblings stood nearby, silently mourning the man they had lost too soon. The funeral was filled with people who had known David, the students he had inspired, the colleagues who had admired him, and the friends who had respected him. The elementary school where David had worked for so many years closed for the day, allowing the students to attend the ceremony. As they gathered around the grave, the students cried openly, their grief palpable. David had been more than just a teacher to them. He had been a mentor, a guiding figure who had made a real difference in their lives. The principal, speaking on behalf of the school, struggled to hold back tears as he spoke of David's dedication and his love for teaching. "He was one of our best teachers, one we've ever had," the principal said, his voice thick with emotion. David was more than just a teacher. He was someone who cared. He changed lives and his impact will never be forgotten. Appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most devout and respected individuals may hide their darkest sides. Never ignore the red flags in a relationship, no matter how perfect someone seems on the outside. True love is built on trust, respect, and mutual care, not control, manipulation, or fear. This story is a stark reminder of the importance of truly understanding the person you are committing to before making life-altering decisions. If you found the story eye-opening, make sure to subscribe to stay updated with more thought-provoking content. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. See you on the next one.